The gray sky above Pyongyang was filled with the drums and the synchronized stomping of thousands of boots. Red banners fluttered in the icy wind, each one emblazoned with the smiling portrait of the supreme leader. Along the boulevard, citizens stood shoulder to shoulder, packed so tightly that no one could move. Their instructions had been clear: clap, cheer, smile, and do not stop. Ginho stood among them, palms already raw from the endless clapping. Each smack of his hands stung, but he dared not slow down. Round him, faces shone with rehearsed joy, mouths open in chants that sounded more like pleas than celebrations. He felt the weight of eyes everywhere: Korean soldiers on rooftops, guards weaving through the crowds, and the watchful lenses of cameras capturing every expression. Inside, Ginho's chest ached. He hadn't eaten properly in days. The thin soup at the factory cafeteria barely filled his stomach, and he longed for the taste of rice, something he hadn't had in months. But hunger was not an excuse here. A drooping eyelid, a crooked smile, the slightest hesitation in applause, all could be misread as treason. He forced his lips upward, baring his teeth in what he prayed looked like joy. His arms slapped together faster, harder, matching the rhythm of those around him. Sweat dripped down his neck despite the cold. The tanks rolled past, their steel tracks clanging against the pavement. Jets roared overhead, leaving trails across the pale sky. The crowd erupted louder, as if the very volume of their voices might prove their loyalty. Children hoisted small flags, waving them furiously. Ginho glanced at them and thought of his own son, Haein, back home with his mother. He wondered if Haein would grow up knowing only fear disguised as pride. Then it happened. As he wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his smile faltered. Only for a moment, but long enough. From the corner of his eye, Ginho caught the sharp gaze of two Korean soldiers. They weren't watching the parade. They were watching him. One leaned toward the other, whispering something. The second soldier's lips curved into a thin smirk. Jinho's heart lurched. He clapped harder, faster. His smile stretched painfully across his face until his jaw trembled. But it was too late. He could feel it. The suspicion had already been planted. Round him, the chants grew louder, drowning the thud of his own racing pulse. Long live the supreme leader. Long live the strength of our nation. The voices rose like waves, but Ginho could no longer hear them. All he could hear was the soldier's whisper echoing in his mind. He knew then that a smile could save a life, or it could destroy one. The parade ended, but Jinho's nightmare had just begun. As the final chants faded into the cold air, people dispersed in neat lines, careful not to break the illusion of discipline. Ginho tried to blend into the mass, his hands aching and red, his cheeks stiff from the forced smile. He kept his eyes forward, heart pounding with each step. Maybe, just maybe, the Korean soldiers had forgotten him. "Citizen, stop." The words sliced through the air. Ginho froze. His breath caught in his throat as two uniformed guards stepped toward him, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their faces were stone, their eyes sharp. The crowd around him instinctively avoided looking, walking faster as if distance alone could erase his existence. "You there?" one guard barked. "Why did your smile fade?" Jinho's blood ran cold. His lips twitched into a trembling grin. "Comrade, I smiled the whole time," he stammered, voice shaking. "I was clapping, cheering, look, my hands." He held up his raw palms as proof. The second guard narrowed his eyes. "Your loyalty cannot be measured by sore hands. The supreme leader sees all, even the smallest betrayal." Jinho's knees weakened. A crowd was still within earshot, yet nobody turned. To speak up for him would be suicide. He felt utterly alone, exposed like prey before wolves. The first guard stepped closer, so close Ginho could smell the bitter temps of tobacco on his breath. "Were you thinking treasonous thoughts? Were you mocking the leader in your mind?" "No," Jinho's voice cracked. His chest heaved as he forced himself to bow deeply. "I swear I would give my life for the leader." A face, my smile. Perhaps it looked weak because of hunger. "Forgive me, comrade. Forgive me." The guards exchanged a glance. One smirked. The other simply nodded. "You will be reported," the first said coldly. "Suspicion must be examined. If you are loyal, you will have nothing to fear." The words twisted like a knife in Jinho's gut. He knew what examination meant. Endless questions, nights in a cold cell, perhaps worse. He bowed again and again, nearly collapsing under the weight of fear. Finally, with a dismissive wave, the guards turned away, leaving him trembling in the street. His legs felt like water. He could barely breathe. The joyous music of the parade still echoed faintly through the city, but for Jin-ho, it had become the sound of doom. He stumbled home through the narrow alleys, each step heavier than the last. He thought of his wife, Mi-suk, and his son waiting for him. How could he tell them that a single smile, or the lack of it, had put their lives in danger? That night, as he lay on the straw mat beside his sleeping family, Jin-ho kept his eyes open. Every shadow on the wall looked like Korean soldiers. Every creak of the wooden door felt like the sound of boots approaching. The regime had noticed him. Once noticed, no one was ever safe again. On the next morning, Jin-ho woke to the sound of distant drums, still echoing faintly from the parade grounds. His son, little Min-soo, was curled beside him, his tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Mi-suk was already awake, sitting near the stove, coaxing a small flame from damp wood. The smell of thin corn porridge lingered in the air, weak and watery, hardly enough to feed a child, let alone a family. Jin-ho sat up slowly, every bone aching. Sleep had not come to him. Mind replayed the words of the guards. "You will be reported." Did something happen? Mi-suk's voice was soft but sharp. She knew her husband's silences too well. Her eyes studied his face, searching for answers. Jin-ho forced a smile, but his lips trembled. Nothing, just tired from the parade. But Mi-suk did not believe him. In their world, hiding the truth was survival, even from loved ones. Yet the fear in her eyes matched his own. She said nothing more, ladling the porridge into 3 small bowls, each portion thinner than the last. As they ate, neighbors' voices floated through the thin walls, whispers of arrests after the parade. One man had shouted too late. Another had failed to raise his hand in time. Each was taken away under the watchful eyes of Korean soldiers. The stories were told in hushed tones, as though the walls themselves might carry the words to informers. Jin-ho's spoon clattered against the bowl. His hand shook. He knew it was only a matter of time before they came for him. That night, as the village sank into uneasy silence, he could not stay inside. He slipped out into the freezing darkness, pulling his jacket tight. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough to light his path. He walked toward the riverbank, where the reeds swayed like ghosts in the wind. There he met his old friend Kong Dae, a wiry man with hollow cheeks and eyes that darted at every sound. Kong Dae whispered quickly, as if each word was a crime. "I heard about the guards," Kong Dae said. "They're watching you. If your name is written down, you're finished." Jin-ho swallowed hard. What can I do? My family, my boy, if they take me, they'll starve." "There's only one way," Kong Dae murmured, leaning closer. "Escape, cross the river, into China. If you're lucky, you find work, maybe food, maybe freedom." The word freedom felt dangerous, almost blasphemous. Jin-ho glanced over his shoulder, certain a soldier was listening in the dark. "Wait. But if they catch me," he whispered back. Kong Dae's eyes hardened. "Then you die. But at least you die trying to live." The words sank deep into Jin-ho's chest. He thought of Mi-suk's quiet strength, of Min-soo's frail body. He could not protect them if he stayed. As he walked home through the cold night, the weight of choice pressed against him. Stay and wait for arrest or risk everything on a chance across the river. Either way, the shadows of the regime were closing in. It came at dawn. 3 hard raps against the wooden door, sharp and merciless, cutting through the stillness of morning. Jin-ho's eyes shot open. For a moment, he could not breathe. He had known this sound would come. Mi-suk froze by the stove, her hands trembling as she clutched the ladle. Min-soo stirred under his blanket, whispering in his sleep. The knocking came again, louder this time, accompanied by a barked command. "Open. In the name of the People's Guard." Jin-ho's blood turned to ice. His legs moved before his mind could think, carrying him to the door. He slid the bolt with shaking fingers and pulled it open. 3 Korean soldiers stood outside. Their uniforms were crisp, boots shining even in the mud of the village path. Behind them, 2 neighbors watched from a distance, their faces pale with curiosity and fear. Nobody dared come closer. "You," the tallest soldier said, his face expressionless. "Report for questioning now." Jin-ho bowed low, forcing respect into every movement. Yes, comrade. His voice cracked. Mi-suk's eyes filled with silent terror. She clutched Minzu tighter, as though the Korean soldiers might rip the boy from her arms. But the Korean soldiers did not glance at them. Their eyes remained on Jin-ho. He was marched through the village past neighbors who pretended not to look. Every step echoed with shame. He thought of the whispers he had overheard. Others taken after the parade, never seen again. Would this be his last walk through his village? The Korean soldiers pushed him into the local office, a crumbling concrete building adorned with portraits of the leader. Inside, the smell of mildew and smoke was suffocating. He was seated at a bare wooden table. A single bulb hung overhead, swaying slightly. The officer across from him wore a stern expression, eyes sharp as blades. "You were at the parade," the officer began, his tone flat. "You clapped, you smiled. But your smile." He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a hiss. "Looked false." Jin-ho's heart pounded so loudly he thought it would echo in the room. "Comrade, I was tired. My face must have faltered. I swear my loyalty." The officer slammed his hand on the table, making Jin-ho flinch. Lies, loyalty does not falter. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Finally, the officer leaned back, studying him. "You will be watched. One wrong move, one wrong word, and you will not return home. Do you understand?" "Yes, comrade," Jin-ho whispered. When he was released, the Korean soldiers shoved him back into the street. The cold morning air cut his skin, but relief flooded him. He was alive. Yet as he stumbled home, shame and dread weighed heavier than ever. The eyes of his neighbors burned into his back. They knew. The guards had marked him. Inside his house, Mi-suk met him with trembling hands. "What did they say?" Jin-ho lowered his eyes. "They said I smiled wrong." And in that absurd truth lay the horror of their lives. Even a smile could become a death sentence. North Korean town, the days after the interrogation, felt like walking on cracked ice, every step threatening to break beneath Jin-ho. He returned to the coal yard, shoveling in silence, but he could feel it the stairs. His co-workers no longer spoke to him casually. Their words were clipped, their glances quick. Some avoided him altogether, as if being near him might taint their own loyalty. One morning, an old friend, Dong Hwan, whispered while they loaded sacks, "Be careful. Say your name was mentioned at the local office, that your loyalty is questioned." Jin-ho stiffened, forcing himself not to react. The walls had ears. Even Dong Hwan's warning could be a trap. He only nodded and went back to work, his muscles straining under the weight of coal. At home, the tension grew worse. Mi-suk hardly slept, listening for footsteps outside. Misu, too young to understand, asked why father no longer smiled. Jin-ho could not answer. He had no smiles left to give. The fear followed him everywhere. In the market, he noticed a woman staring at him for too long before turning away. At night, shadows seemed to linger outside their window. Once, he swore he heard footsteps stop right outside their door before fading away. The worst part was the silence of the neighbors. Once they had shared small kindnesses, an extra bowl of porridge, a few stolen laughs. Now, their faces closed off when he passed. Mothers pulled their children inside. Even the village dogs avoided his path. It wasn't long before his name reached his mother's ears. She arrived one evening, her frail body bent, but her eyes blazing with fear. "What did you do?" she demanded, voice trembling. "The Korean soldiers came to me, asked about you. They said your smile was not right." "Your smile?" Jin-ho bowed his head. "I said nothing wrong, mother. I did nothing wrong." But the words sounded hollow, even to him. He knew the truth. It didn't matter what he had done. In North Korea, innocence was irrelevant. Survival depended on appearances, and one faltering smile had marked him. That night, as the family huddled together in the dark, Jin-ho felt the crushing weight of invisible chains. He knew they were being watched every moment of their lives, dissected by unseen eyes. His world had shrunk to a suffocating prison, one where every gesture, every expression, every word could condemn them. The river beyond the mountains whispered in his dreams. It was the line between life and death, slavery and freedom, yet the thought of crossing it filled him with both hope and dread. For now, though, all he could do was pretend to smile harder, clap louder, bow deeper. To live a performance that might never be enough, nights became the most dangerous time for Jinho. The silence of the village was never truly silent, dogs barking suddenly in the distance. The crunch of boots on frozen earth, the faint knock on a neighbor's door at midnight, each sound carried the weight of doom. One evening, as the family shared their thin meal of watery soup, a faint tapping echoed on the wall. Jinho froze, spoon halfway to his lips. He waited, listening. A second tap came, softer this time. He rose quietly and stepped outside. In the shadows, Dong Huan emerged, his breath misting in the freezing air. His voice was low, urgent. "They're watching you, Jinho. I heard it myself at the office. They say you disrespected the great leader with your expression." Someone reported it. Jinho's chest tightened. "Who?" Dong Huan shook his head. "I don't know, but people are whispering. Some say your name is already written down. Once it's written, it doesn't get erased." The words cut like knives. Jinho looked back at his house, at the faint glow of the lamp where his wife and son waited. His entire family was at risk because of his smile. "Why are you telling me this?" Jinho asked. Dong Huan hesitated. "Because we grew up together." "But listen to me, you must act normal. Smile more, shout louder at the parades, praise him until your throat bleeds." Or, he trailed off, his eyes darting nervously to the street, "or you must leave, before they come for you." The suggestion was madness. Leaving meant certain death if caught. Yet staying meant a slower death, interrogations, starvation camps, the fate that awaited all who were accused. That night, Jinho couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to Misuk's quiet breathing and the soft snores of little Minsu. He thought of the frozen river beyond the mountains, of the faint promise of South Korea world he had only heard about in whispers. Freedom, food, safety. But leaving meant abandoning his mother. And if he failed, it would not just be his life, they would punish his entire family. The darkness pressed heavier as doubts gnawed at him. He remembered the guards' eyes at the parade, the way they lingered on him like a wolf watching prey. He could not shake the feeling that his time was running out. The next morning, when he stepped outside, he noticed it again. 2 men standing by the corner, pretending to talk. Their eyes flickered to him, then away. Jinho forced a smile on his face as he walked past, his heart pounding so loudly he thought they could hear it. His life had become a game of masks, and every second was another chance to slip. The frost-covered dawn carried with it a sense of suffocation. Jinho walked to the ration station, hands trembling inside his worn gloves. He noticed how people glanced at him differently now, short, sharp looks followed by quick averted gazes. It was the way neighbors looked at someone marked. Inside the station, the clerk handed him a smaller portion than usual. Jinho stared at the thin bag of cornmeal in disbelief. "This is all?" he asked, before he could stop himself. The clerk's expression hardened. "Be grateful you're still on the list." The words struck like a hammer, shuffled away, the stares of the others digging into his back. He knew then it was true. His family was already under suspicion. That night, Misuk confronted him. "Why are the rations less?" she asked, voice cracking with exhaustion. "Did you anger them?" Jinho lowered his head, unable to answer. She turned away, tears glistening in her eyes. Their son Minsu sat quietly in the corner, too young to understand, but old enough to sense the fear. Days later, the betrayal came. Dong-hoon, his childhood friend, the man who had whispered warnings in the night, was suddenly distant. When Jinho saw him speaking with 2 uniformed officers in the square, his heart sank. The officers nodded as Dong Huan gestured toward Jinho's home. That evening, Jinho's mother whispered, "We must leave. You can't wait any longer. They will come for us." Jinho wanted to argue, to cling to denial, but the truth was already clawing inside him. Every knock on the door made his heart seize. Every shadow felt like a soldier. He tried once more to reason with Dong Huan. Found him outside the factory, smoke curling in the icy air. "Why?" Jinho asked. His voice shook, but his eyes held fire. Dong Huan wouldn't meet his gaze. "I had no choice. They questioned me. If I didn't say something, they'd suspect me too." "I'm sorry, Jinho." Sorry, the word was empty, drowned beneath the sound of betrayal, and Jinho's fists clenched, but he did not strike. What use was anger when the regime turned brother against brother? That night, he told Misuk the words that had been burning in his chest. "We must escape. Her eyes widened, her face pale with terror. "Do you know what you're saying? If we fail, if we stay, they'll take us anyway," he whispered back, his hand trembling as it gripped hers. Silence hung between them, heavy as the frozen air outside. But in her eyes, he saw it, the faint flicker of desperate hope. For the first time in weeks, Jin-ho felt his chest loosen. Not with relief, but with the grim clarity of a man who knew there was no turning back. The night was bone-chilling, the wind rattling the thin shutters of their shack. Jin-ho sat hunched over a broken lantern, the faint glow barely lighting his face. He drew rough lines in the dirt with his stick-crude sketches of paths he remembered from his youth. When he and his friends used to sneak near the hills for firewood, those hills led north to the river. Beyond the frozen water lay a world he had only heard about in whispers. Freedom. Misuk sat across from him, her hands wrapped tightly around their son Misu. "Are you certain?" she asked in a low, strained voice. Jin-ho nodded slowly. "It's the only way. The Korean soldiers will come for us soon. If we don't try, we die here." Each word felt like a stone dropped into silence. The following days became a dance of caution. Jin-ho stole moments in the factory to gather scrap bits of cloth, rusty nails, broken tools. He traded his last keepsake, his father's pocket knife, to an old woman for dried beans and a handful of sugar. Every exchange was dangerous. Every glance from a soldier felt like a knife pressed to his throat. At night, he whispered plans to Misuke. "We move when the moon is smallest. Less light." She listened in silence, clutching Minswell, whose innocent eyes flickered between fear and confusion. But Jin-ho knew the risk wasn't just in the escape. It was in the betrayal. Neighbors listened through walls. Friends became informants for survival. Even within his home, he worried. Could Misuke carry the weight of fear without cracking? Could he? One evening, as they ate their thin broth, his mother placed her frail hand over his. "You must promise me something," she said, her voice shaking. "If we are caught, you must protect your son first. Don't let him see the camps." The words pierced him deeper than any blade. He nodded, though the promise felt impossible. Outside, the parade drums echoed in the distance, reminders of the regime's iron grip. But in Jin-ho's heart, a different rhythm was beating now, a rhythm of defiance. That night, as the others slept, he stepped outside. The stars glimmered weakly in the dark sky. He whispered into the cold air, as if speaking to the frozen river itself. "Wait for us. Carry us across." His breath fogged and vanished. But in that moment, Jin-ho felt something he hadn't in years resolve. The tunnel had failed. Trust had betrayed him. But this time, it would be his hands, his family, his choice. There was no turning back. Misuke and little Minsu through the trees. Their footsteps crunched softly in the snow, each sound magnified in the silence of the winter forest. Behind them, Kasong lay shrouded in darkness, its faint factory chimneys spitting smoke even at midnight. Ahead stretched only shadows and the promise of the river. Misuke clutched Minsu to her chest, wrapping him in layers of worn blankets. His small whimpers echoed against her heart. "She, my love," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Jin-ho stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. He crouched low, ears straining. In the distance came the faint rumble of boots patrols along the banks. The sound froze his blood. He motioned for them to move slowly, carefully, weaving between skeletal trees until the forest gave way to the open expanse of the Tumen River. It lay before them like a sheet of broken glass, the frozen water glinting under the weak moonlight. Cracks ran through the ice, black veins in the white surface. On the far side, just beyond the fog, was China. Freedom. Misuke's grip tightened on his arm. "It looks thin," she whispered. Jin-ho stared at the ice. He knew she was right. Wrong step could plunge them into the freezing current below. But the greater danger was behind them. He could almost feel the eyes of the regime pressing into his back. He stepped first, pressing one foot onto the ice. It groaned beneath his weight, a sound like an animal in pain. He shifted, spreading his weight, moving forward inch by inch. Misuke followed, clutching Minsu so tightly that the boy buried his face into her coat. Every sound, the cracking ice, the whispering wind, the beating of his heart felt amplified. Halfway across, Minchu whimpered. Jinho turned, his eyes full of fear, but also desperate reassurance. Just a little more, he mouthed. Then came the sound that shattered everything. A shout. From the far bank, lights burst into the night. Korean soldiers, their voices tore across the silence like thunder. "Stop," one bellowed. Rifles snapped into position. Misuk gasped, tightening her hold on Minsu. Jinho's chest constricted. The ice beneath him groaned louder, trembling under the weight of their fear. There was no going back. "Run," he hissed, though there was nowhere to run. Their steps became faster, the cracks beneath them spreading like spider webs. The river moaned in protest. Then the sharp crack of a rifle split the night. The frozen crossing had begun, but already death was watching. The first shot echoed across the river like thunder rolling through the mountains. Ginho felt the ice shudder beneath him, a haunting reminder that both man and nature could take his life in an instant. He didn't know if the bullet had struck close, or if the sound alone had cracked his courage. All he knew was that they had been seen. "Faster, Mizuk," he cried, his voice torn between command and desperation. She clutched Minsu tighter and pushed forward, her feet slipping on the slick surface. The boy's small arms trembled as he buried his face against her neck. His muffled sobs blended with the sharp barks of Korean soldiers behind them. Another shot. This one struck the ice inches from Ginho's boots, sending shards flying upward. He stumbled but forced himself onward. The lights from the rifles' muzzles danced across the darkness like hungry eyes. Misuk's voice cracked with terror. "We're not going to make it." Jinho turned his head, his breath white in the air, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and love. "We will. For him we must." The river groaned beneath their weight. Each step widened the fractures that raced like black lightning under the surface. Ahead, the faint shadow of the Chinese bank beckoned. Freedom was so close he could almost taste it. Then came the scream. Misuk's body jerked violently as a bullet tore through her shoulder. She collapsed to her knees, Minsu tumbling onto the ice. The boy wailed, his cry piercing the night like a final plea. Jinho spun, rushing back to her, his hands reaching out. "Get up, please, Misuk. Get up," his voice cracked, breaking with the sound of his world collapsing. She tried, blood seeping into the snow. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Take him, go." But there was no time. Another shot rang out, and Jinho felt fire rip through his side. He fell hard onto the ice, his body convulsing with pain. The ice beneath him groaned louder, a sickening warning. Korean soldiers' shouts grew clearer. Their boots pounded along the bank, rifles raised. Skoke crawled toward Minsu, pulling the boy against her chest one last time. Jinho's vision blurred, but even through the haze, he saw her rocking their son as if to shield him from the world's cruelty. The final shots came in quick succession. The night erupted with violence, then silence. Only the river remained, groaning under the weight of the fallen, swallowing the last warmth of a family that had dreamed of freedom. By morning, the ice would freeze over their blood, erasing their struggle. But the wind carried their story across the border. An invisible testimony of a family that dared to hope itself was cut down.